Yes.
Okay. So I guess we can start, can we? Thank you very much. Good evening, Book Space. My name is Mирослави Лузіної, and it is my honor today to introduce the main speaker for this event, Professor Lії Praiss. She is a professor at 2 American universities at once. I don't know how she does that, but she does. Since 2003, she has been a full professor at Harvard University. And 2 years ago, she also became a professor at Подія University, which we don't often hear about here in Ukraine, but it is the 8th oldest college in the United States, located in New Jersey, and it is recognized as the State University of New Jersey. As a professor of English, she teaches the novel, 18th and 19th century British culture, and a certain subject that we will hear more about from her today, book history. She has several books to her name, and I don't mean books she owns, because she probably owns thousands, but books she has actually written. And the most recent of them is the focus of our event today. It's called What We Talk About When We Talk About Books. It was published in the United States in 2019, and last year it was also published in Ukraine. Here is the Ukrainian edition, brought to you by Якою publishers. And I was the one who translated it into Ukrainian, which is why I get to ask Professor Praiss questions today. The title is self-explanatory. It is a book about books. And since books are the reason that we are all here today at this festival, it is only proper that we take a deeper look at what they are and what we do with them. So let's dive right into it. Professor Praiss, Leah, it is very nice to finally be able to talk to you live. In the United States in 2020, your book has won the Christian Goss Award of the Phi Beta Kappa Society. This is an award that honors outstanding books in the field of literary scholarship or criticism. In Ukraine, also in 2020, the translation of your book became one of the winners of the Book of the Year prize. In the nonfiction category called Horizons, it was a co-winner with a book about germs. So apparently our horizons today are books and germs. But of course, even prize-winning books don't always get glowing reviews from all readers. And among those reviews that are reader reviews that are critical, there is a recurring theme. Apparently, the reader is disappointed because your book turned out to be something else, something different from what they were expecting. And they were expecting that you would be writing about literature, but you're not writing about literature and its meaning and importance for our lives in this book, not what literature can teach us and what feelings it might spark in us. As one reviewer put it, it is more a history of books and how and the physical of books rather than the why, what, or who of books. So when we talk about books, is it only their content, literature, that can tell us something about ourselves as humans? Or is there something about books as physical objects that can do that too?
Thank you for that characteristically provocative and trenchant question, Miroslava, and thank you even more for a translation that is significantly more accurate and clear, I believe, than the original. One of the arguments of my book and of the field to which I belong is that books are not simply some kind of convenient bucket that ferries ideas from the mind of an author to the mind of a reader, but that rather they are physical objects that are the product of a team effort from a lot of people, such as editors, such as printers, such as distributors, and of course, most importantly, in this case, such as translators. So it's really delight to be actually talking to one another now rather than just emailing back and forth. So yes, to your question about books and germs as the bookends or the twin poles of this horrific year. One answer to your question about how the physical book matters, why we should care about the book as an object rather than just the text as a sequence of words, actually has to do with germs. And I'm thinking here of the fact that researchers in a rare books library or in an archive can sometimes be seen sniffing a book. And usually the reason that they are sniffing it is to see whether it smells of vinegar or of some other disinfectant. Because if the book smells like salad, like a good vinaigrette, you know that that book has probably passed through a border or a customs office at a time when one of the countries involved was quarantining, and when throughout the early modern period, customs officials sprayed books with vinegar in order to prevent their becoming vectors of disease. This is a kind of information borne by the printed book, the book as an object that you can't find in a page scan or a page image or an MP3 audiobook or a digitized book file. So one of the reasons that people in my field, the field of book history, believe that we should care about the book as an object is because the book carries information. But another reason is that the book vehicles social connections. And again, we can think about this in the context of the pandemic, because here in the United States, which has combined extremely uneven patchwork local lockdowns with extremely efficient, ruthless, nationwide e-commerce monopolized by a single corporation, Amazon. Around March of 2020, independent bookstores in the United States, many of them pivoted from selling books, which are inefficient and heavy and costly to ship, to selling face masks that bore the slogan, "Stay home, stay safe, read books." So I think in this country, throughout the pandemic, reading has been seen as a safe activity. It's what you do if you're lucky enough to have a white-collar job to while away your boredom while you're locked down. And this is historically striking because in the 19th century, books were seen as a vector of disease. Librarians invented book fumigators, a kind of gas chamber that would douse books with sulfuric acid between loans so that one library patron's germs wouldn't get given to another. So this, I think, is a way of saying that the book, for better and for worse, tends to be a vehicle of social connections and even physical connections, but between and among different readers. Some people are happy with those connections. Some people are afraid of those connections. But when you're reading a book, it's never just between you, the reader, and the author. Something is always going on between you and your fellow readers.
Okay, thank you for this interesting answer, which actualizes or makes it more poignant the way that the books have become a way of safe, like hiding yourself in a safe harbor at home, reading in this age rather than earlier when probably when not so many books were published and not everyone owned books or like hundreds of books, because many of us these days can buy books easily and cheaply. But earlier books were scarce, and apparently the people who read them were coming into closer connections through the books than today. Do I understand this right? Okay, my next question is a description of one of your courses on book history, because you teach Leah teaches a number of courses. It mentions the first information age. Today, we have this idea that we live in the information age. The first one probably because earlier there was the industrial age, and earlier there was the Renaissance and the Dark Ages, and we have this idea that only today today we have come into the information age, but apparently there was an information age before that, according to you. So can you tell us what is the time frame of this age? What made it deserving of this label, information age, and what were its main characteristics?
We tend to think of our own age as unique because we are all narcissists, and we like to lump together all of history as the undistinguished before from which our after has departed. But you could argue that ever since the invention of movable type printing, which is depending on how you count and where you situate it, roughly half a millennium ago, you could describe the printed book as the key information technology. Because although we think of ebooks as new and innovative and printed books as some kind of boring, dowdy, old-fashioned object that's been around forever, the printed book has throughout its history been at the forefront, at the vanguard of technological and commercial innovation. Think about bookstores. In early modern Europe, so in the 18th century and 19th century, bookstores were the very first business to experiment with open shelf browsing. That is, to put the goods out on shelves that customers were allowed to access and to pick things up from and look at and put back again, rather than the kind of store where everything is behind the counter and you need to know what you're looking for before you ask for it. So bookstores pioneered open shelf browsing. Book distributors in the mid-20th century pioneered barcodes and various other kinds of computerized inventory control systems, so that before we had ebooks, electronic books, digital books, print books were already the first commodity to be cataloged both in libraries and in warehouses through automated, computerized kinds of lists that made them easy to retrieve. And this is, of course, one reason why when a certain young entrepreneur named Jeff Bezos decided to find a guinea pig on which to test out his idea of an e-commerce website, the obvious object with which to pilot his new idea was books, not just because they are shaped like an envelope, they're not perishable, and they're easy to mail, but also because print books were already extremely better inventoried than other commodities. I should also say that in the 19th century, the whole industry of consumer credit started with books. They were one of the first goods that you could buy in installments without paying cash down. So the printed book was really, and is, I would say, continues to be an information technology, which is why it seems slightly dodgy for those of us now who see the book as a refuge from a hyperactive digital sphere to institute things like a technology-free reading room, which is now an institution in many American public libraries, meaning a room where you need to turn off your phone and you can't bring your laptop. And in these rooms, much as I love them, I always want to say, you want to see a technology? This is a technology. The book is a technology with its paper, with its stitching. This is the most technical technology of them all.
It's interesting that apparently we have no reasons to juxtapose physical books and something that is electronic, because apparently the book is a really good technology. We don't need to plug it in. Its battery doesn't run down. However, in this day and age, when everyone is doom scrolling their Twitter feeds or their Facebook feeds, everyone is already lamenting the loss of the art of reading. Can you tell us, as someone who studies books and the interaction between books and readers, has the age of pervasive and ubiquitous information technology made us less likely or less able to read? And I mean read books, not just read something that someone posted on Twitter.
Well, your question prompts an obvious answer, which is that maybe all of us should leave the festival, walk out of the festival, or log off of our screens for those of us who are attending remotely and just go and read a book. So that would certainly be one answer. Reading has consistently been a crime of opportunity cost. That is, in the rich world, in rich countries, for the past few centuries, the thing stopping people from reading has by and large not been access to objects themselves. It hasn't been whether people are able to afford to lay their hands on a book. It's much more whether we have time to read the book. And this is why Schopenhauer famously said that it's a pity that when you buy a book, you can't also buy the time in which to read the book. So yes, absolutely, anything that takes up our time is taking us away from long-form reading. That said, it doesn't have to be doom scrolling. It could be our jobs taking time away from long-form reading. And in support of that hypothesis is the fact that consistently for the last 2 centuries in rich countries, the heaviest readers are women, children, and old people. So who isn't reading? It's men of working age. There seems to be a cultural understanding that if you could be earning money by working, you shouldn't be reading a book. You could be reading a spreadsheet or an email or a memo, but reading books is for people who have nothing better to do with their time. And this is really a very sharp change from most of human history, in which the people who have had the chance to read are the most privileged people, in which you don't send your daughter to school because that would be a waste of investment. You send your son to school so that he can use his literacy to make money. And returning again to the pandemic, in the United States, book reading rates have spiked, as have book buying rates and book borrowing rates, library usage, and especially audiobook sales and audiobook loans have spiked during the pandemic because lockdowns seem to have opened up some time that was filled by reading. So I'd be very curious to hear from you if you know what the analogous statistics are in Ukraine, what the effect of the pandemic on rates of reading have been, if it's not too soon to tell.
Well, I'm here at this festival. Tomorrow we have I will write back to you about that because I don't have an answer like right off the bat. There is an event tomorrow where people who actually are booksellers will discuss the future of the book market. So I will probably hear something interesting and I will get back to you with it. But generally, we when I we are now here in Dnipro, back in Kiev, where I live. I often travel by underground, the metro, and there are a number of people around there who read something on e-readers. People are on their phones, and I don't usually know what a person who is on their phone is doing. And this actually brings me to my next question. What actually you as a book historian, as someone who has dedicated your life to studying books, do you have a definition or a theory about what a book actually is? When I'm on the phone and someone asks me, what are you doing? And I'm saying, I'm reading a book. What I'm reading is different from those times when I'm reading an article that I saved in the Pocket app.
One crude difference has to do with length. A book is immersive, and it's immersive not simply because you spend a long time reading it, so you've made a decision that it is worth a significant fraction of your life, but also because you can read an article in one sitting, whereas a book is interwoven through pauses and returns with the rhythm of your own intervening activities. But I would also ask whether Pocket, the example that you've used, which is also an app that I love because it saves articles for later reading, offline reading, whether Pocket is not in fact an attempt to make articles more book-like, less ephemeral, more permanent. I think your question is pointing in two directions. One is how difficult it is to define book. Notoriously, UNESCO, when it was trying to develop guidelines for what forms of information should be subsidized or protected or exempted from tax or from various kinds of border controls, UNESCO defined book as a non-periodical printed publication of at least 49 pages made available to the public. And this begs all kinds of questions. What is meant by print? If a book is typed out on carbon paper, is that publication? If a book is hand copied and circulated surreptitiously. Is that a book? Is a blog that's made available to the public a book? And of course, the form in which this often comes up today with the phone, since you mentioned your phone, is the question of whether listening to an audiobook counts as reading. Looking at the statistics from these past 2 years in the United States, the biggest winner has not been the printed book, and it hasn't been the electronic book. It's been the audiobook, even though at the beginning of the pandemic in this country, in March 2020, there was a sharp drop in audiobook downloads, which it seems safe to link to the moment when commuters stopped riding the subway or stopped driving their cars, and those empty spaces in the morning and evening when commuters had been filling dead time with audiobooks ended, but the audiobook has really bounced back. And that's also, in a sense, a form of digital reading, because audiobooks are, in the form of MP3s, are digital downloads. And yet, in terms of the kind of unknowability or privacy in public that you're talking about when you describe yourself reading on the metro, an audiobook where you've got your earphones in is quite different from what you're doing when you're looking down at your phone.
I have just been looking at my phone, and not because I got bored with what you're saying, but precisely for the opposite reason, because what you're saying just brought me to a thought. I don't read audiobooks. I'm very much used to reading text. But since this is the 21st century and I need to keep up with the times, I have attempted to listen to an audiobook once as I was driving, and I was on my phone. I was looking for the ebook version in my iBook library, but I haven't found it. I think it was the name of the author is Ted Young or something, and the book is called Exhalation, and it is I'm not sure this is the correct name of the book, but the point is it is a very complicated description of a person. So it is written in a form of a parable, and it talks about a person traveling in time, trying to correct their destiny, meeting themselves or meeting their wife, this person's wife, in earlier, 20 years later or 20 years earlier. And as when you're driving, you sort of need to watch for the road and what is happening on the road. So it was absolutely impossible to keep track of this of the plot. And this actually brings me probably my verdict is that audiobook is not a book, precisely because, as you said, with a book you can set it down, you can run with your eyes back to, you can look at the previous page, you can stop and think and connect the dots, which you were when someone is just talking, you can stop this person. You can rewind, but this is not as seamless as you can do with your eyes on the page. So I don't know whether you will agree with me, but I don't find an audiobook consistent with this definition of being something that can be interrupted and which you can sit down and really think about. And it's not immersive. It's not immersive. It can sound. It can look immersive because you put your earphones on and you are immersed, and you are not you are away from the outside world. But actually, this is not an immersive reading. You have just shut yourself off from the outside world. Okay, I have some more questions to you, again about books and modern societies. And one of the popular ideas in modern society is minimalism. A book by a minimalist guru, Marie Kondo, was a runaway bestseller, both in the United States, as far as I know, and here in Ukraine too. So this is international. And she recommends throwing out everything that doesn't spark joy. And one of the first pieces of advice that she gives to her clients is throwing out the books that they own. Are you, as a book historian, horrified with that? When people throw out books, where do these books today end up? What was happening actually with books in earlier eras when people decided that they no longer need their book collection? And what is the use of book collections?
That's a hard question because it sparks such strong feelings. Having recently moved, I can testify that getting rid of books in some way that does not involve destroying them is extremely difficult because nobody wants them. They do not have the kind of material value that they did before around 1850, when cheap paper made from wood pulp and grasses and other vegetable matter was invented. In the cultures that I study in 18th and 19th century Europe, books were never thrown away. They simply made their way down a chain of successive recyclers so that a book would begin its life in the hands of a rich person. When it was out of date, they would resell it to a slightly less rich person who couldn't pay for the newest, latest, most fashionable novel. That person would then either rent it or sell it to someone still less rich, and then that person would pass it further down the social chain to someone who would tear out the pages to use to stuff the cracks in windows or line a pie plate or wrap a sandwich. Now that we have cheap books and we have plastic wrap and aluminum foil, books tend to be valued for their content, for the words that they contain, rather than for their material properties. And something that I think we've lost in this change is the ability to notice the material properties of the books that we're reading. Whereas in 19th century London, you can find illiterate vegetable sellers who work at street markets describing in great detail which newspaper they prefer, not because they care about the political stance of different newspapers, but because they know from experience which daily newspaper is the most absorbent, so good if you want to soak up spills, and which daily newspaper is more waxy, so good if you want to wrap up something greasy or smelly, like fish. I think that we have forgotten how to experience books as tactile objects, and that forgetting began not with the age of electronic books, but much earlier with the age of cheap paper. And one thing that I hope that my field, book history, can do is to restore our senses and our sense of the book as an object that has a heft and a texture and a feel, none of which means that you should never throw away a book. I will say personally that the thing that drives me crazy is not seeing books out on the sidewalk for somebody else to take. It's rather seeing books on the coffee table not being read. And this is something that we've seen a new version of during the pandemic, when suddenly the Zoom backdrop, like what you see behind me, the bookshelf, has become a hugely important accessory that has driven business to booksellers, book resellers in the United States that sell secondhand books by the yard, by color, and by size, so that you can create the perfect backdrop for your video calls. And one of these resellers in Washington, D.C. has begun to offer hollowed out books so that you can have the book cover that you want, but the inside is filled with styrofoam, so that if you have those cheap IKEA bookcases that are made not out of wood but out of particle board, they are guaranteed not to buckle under the weight of the books in your backdrop. So the book is a fashion accessory, the book as a statement of identity.
Well, I'm being told that we need to wrap up. And I guess that this thought that you're leaving us with, that books should not be something that we are just proud of owning, but something that we need to experience and something that we need to try to live in, because people, there were a number of people who have put in a lot of work into something that can be just a compact object that we see right here. But actually, this is a concentration of someone's experience, someone's wisdom. So we need probably to remember that. And I hope that our audience today has been brought to think more deeply about what books are. This festival allows the opportunity to thoughtfully buy as many books as they want. And one of those books that we encouraged our audience to buy is your book. Thank you, Leah, for being with us here tonight. Well, it's not yet night where you are, but thank you very much. It was so nice to talk to you, and I hope to see you in the future, maybe sometime, not just by Zoom, but in person. And but so at this point, there is this object that connects us in a better way than books in libraries in earlier ages were connecting just readers who were touching them at different times. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much for talking, Miroslava.